In early 2024, a research drone operating off the coast of Antarctica recorded something that the people who saw the footage still refused to talk about on camera. The drone was a small, unmanned submersible, the kind scientists use to map the underside of ice shelves, and it was never meant to find anything alive down there. The water at that depth is just above freezing. There is almost no light. Most biologists will tell you that nothing large can survive in that kind of cold and pressure for long. And yet, for about 9 seconds, the camera captured the shape of something enormous moving along the seafloor. It was pale, almost white, the color of bone or wax. It had a head. It had what looked like arms. And when it turned, just slightly, toward the light of the drone, the operators say it had a face. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking, because I thought it too. A blurry shape in dark water could be anything. A whale, a trick of the light, a piece of ice. And honestly, if that were the only thing we had, I wouldn't be making this video, and you'd be right to click away. But here's the thing. That drone footage is not the beginning of this story. It's the end of it. Because for more than 20 years, before that drone ever went into the water, sailors, scientists, and entire crews of Japanese whaling vessels had been reporting the exact same creature in the exact same waters. They described it down to the smallest detail, and they did it long before anyone had ever heard the word that would later be used to name it. They called it the Ningen. In Japanese, that word simply means human. And by the time you reach the end of this video, you're going to understand why a team of researchers looked at that 9 seconds of footage, went pale, and quietly classified it. Because what they were looking at wasn't a fish, it wasn't a whale, it was something that looked back. So stay with me, because I'm going to walk you through every piece of this. The sightings, the science, the cover-ups, and the witnesses who risked their careers to talk. And I promise you, by the time we get to that footage, you are not going to look at the ocean the same way again. Before we talk about the creature, you need to understand the place, because the place is half the mystery. Antarctica is the most hostile, least understood, and most heavily restricted landmass on the planet. It is larger than the United States and Mexico combined. It holds about 70% of the world's fresh water, locked inside an ice sheet that in some places is nearly 3 miles thick. No country owns it. No one lives there permanently. The handful of people who go are scientists and support staff who rotate in and out of a few isolated research stations, and even they barely scratch the surface of the coastline, let alone the ocean beneath the ice. And that ocean is the part almost nobody thinks about. When you picture Antarctica, you picture a frozen desert, a flat white nothing, but the continent is ringed by some of the deepest, coldest, darkest water on Earth. The Southern Ocean plunges thousands of feet straight down, and enormous shelves of ice extend out over that water like floors suspended above a basement no human has ever fully explored. There are entire underwater cavities beneath those ice shelves, hidden chambers of liquid water sealed off from the sky for hundreds of thousands of years. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of the seafloor beneath Antarctic ice. Think about what that actually means. We are talking about millions of square miles of pitch-black, sub-freezing water that no human eye has ever seen, sealed under a roof of ice, almost entirely unmonitored. If you wanted to design a place on this planet where a large creature could exist for thousands of years without ever being properly documented, you could not design anything better than this. It is quite literally the last truly unexplored frontier on Earth. And here's the part that should make the hair on your arms stand up. Every few years, marine biologists pull something out of those waters that they didn't know existed. Colossal squid with eyes the size of dinner plates. Fish that produce their own antifreeze so their blood doesn't crystallize. Sea spiders the size of your hand. Creatures that were considered myths until a net or a camera proved otherwise. The deep water around Antarctica has a long, documented history of hiding things that are real. So when people started reporting something far stranger down there, the scientific community didn't laugh as quickly as you might expect, because they, of all people, know what's still hidden in the dark. So what exactly is the Ningen? Let me give you the description, and I want you to pay close attention, because the details are going to matter a lot later. According to the people who claim to have seen it, The Ningen is massive, somewhere between 60 and 90 feet long, which would make it comparable in size to a large whale. But that's where the resemblance to a whale stops. Its skin is described as smooth, pale, and white, almost glowing in dark water, with no scales, no blubbery texture, just a strange, even, fleshy paleness, like the underside of a fish or the skin of a drowned man. Now here's where it gets disturbing. Witnesses say the creature has a distinctly human shape. It has a defined head sitting on what looks like shoulders. It has 2 arms, and at the end of those arms, some accounts describe hands with 5 finger-like appendages. Some say the lower body splits into something like legs, while others describe a long, fluked tail, like a mermaid from the old stories. But the part that everyone fixates on, the part that nobody who claims to have seen it can ever quite forget, is the face. They describe 2 eyes, a slit of a mouth, and an expression that is almost, but not quite, human. Not a fish's face, not a whale's face. A face that, by every account, seems aware. Some witnesses say the creature was simply floating, motionless, watching their vessel. Others describe it moving with slow, deliberate, almost graceful motions, raising what looked like an arm. In a few accounts, the ones that tend to get left out of the polite retellings, describe the creature opening its mouth far wider than a human mouth ever could, into something cavernous and wrong. Now, I know how this sounds. A giant, pale humanoid in the water sounds like a campfire story, something invented to scare new sailors. And if this were one isolated account from one panicked fisherman, I would tell you to forget it. But it isn't. The reason this creature has a name at all, the reason it has been discussed in marine forums, Japanese media, and eventually around the world, is that the description has stayed almost perfectly consistent across completely different witnesses in different years on different ships, many of whom had never spoken to each other and had no reason to invent the same impossible animal. And that consistency, that's the thread we're going to keep pulling on, because it's the thing the skeptics have the hardest time explaining away. To understand where the Ningen came from, we have to go back to the source. And the source is not the internet. This is important, so don't skip past it. The first detailed reports came from Japanese whaling and research fleets operating in the Southern Ocean. For decades, Japan sent vessels deep into Antarctic waters, officially for scientific research, and these crews spent months at a time in some of the most remote ocean on the planet. These were not tourists. These were experienced seamen who had spent their entire lives at sea, who knew exactly what a whale looked like, what a seal looked like, what an iceberg looked like at 3 in the morning in bad light. These were the last people on Earth you could easily fool with the ocean. And it was these crews who started bringing back stories. They spoke of encountering large, white, human-shaped figures in the water, often at night, often holding still on the surface before slipping silently back under. The crews reportedly assumed, at first, that they were looking at some kind of unknown whale or a trick of the polar light. But the figures didn't behave like whales. They didn't spout. They didn't dive the way a whale dives. They floated upright, and according to some accounts, they watched. Here's the detail that I find almost impossible to shake. Many of these sailors didn't want to report what they had seen. In Japanese maritime culture, as in most seafaring cultures, you do not casually claim to have seen a monster. It marks you. It can cost you your reputation and your standing among a crew that depends on one another to survive. These men had every professional incentive to stay quiet, and many of them did, for years. The stories only began to surface slowly, passed between crews, mentioned in passing, until eventually they reached Japanese media and online forums in the mid-2000s, where the name Ningen finally crystallized. And I want you to really sit with the timeline here, because it's the single most important thing in this entire story. These sightings predate the internet's obsession with cryptids. They predate the viral hoax culture we live in now. These were isolated crews, with no financial motive, no audience, and every reason to keep their mouths shut, independently describing the same impossible creature. A pale, giant, human-shaped thing in the coldest water on Earth. When you remove the internet, when you remove the clout, when you remove the money, and the story still doesn't go away, you have to start asking yourself a very uncomfortable question. What if they were all describing the same thing because they were all seeing the same thing? Now here's where a lot of people make a mistake. They treat the Ningen as a strange, modern, isolated Japanese internet legend, something that appeared out of nowhere in the 2000s. But that is completely backwards. Because the truth is, almost every seafaring culture in human history has its own version of this exact creature. And they had it long before Japan, long before Antarctica was even on a map. Think about it. The mermaid is not just a Disney character. The idea of a large, pale, human-shaped creature living in the deep sea appears across cultures that never had any contact with one another. The ancient Babylonians worshipped a sea god named Oannes, described as a being that emerged from the water with a human form. Norse sailors told of the Marjager, a monstrous sea woman of the cold northern oceans. Scottish and Irish folklore is full of the Selkies and the Mero human-shaped beings of the deep. West African traditions speak of Mami Wata, a powerful water spirit in human form. Even Christopher Columbus recorded in his own ship's log that he had seen what he believed were mermaids on his voyage, though he noted, rather grumpily, that they were not as beautiful as the paintings. Now, the easy explanation is that all of these are just misidentified manatees and seals, and tired sailors letting their imaginations run wild. And for many of them, sure, that's probably exactly what happened. But here is what the easy explanation conveniently ignores. Why is the creature so consistently described as human-shaped? Of all the forms a sea monster could take, why does nearly every isolated culture independently land on the same one, a large, pale, humanoid body with a face? A seal does not look human. A manatee does not look human. And yet the deep water of every ocean, in every era, seems to produce the same haunting report from people who could not possibly have copied one another. This is the exact same pattern we see with the Ningen. Different witnesses, different centuries, different hemispheres, no contact between them, all describing the same impossible thing. And there are really only two ways to explain a pattern like that. Either every human culture on Earth happens to share the identical hallucination, an idea that frankly raises more questions than it answers, or there is something in the deep water that people keep actually seeing. I'm not telling you which one is true, but I am telling you that the moment you place the Ningen next to thousands of years of nearly identical sightings from every corner of the planet, it stops looking like a modern hoax and starts looking like the newest chapter in the oldest story humanity has. At this point, the rational part of your brain is probably putting up a fight, and good, it should be. Because the obvious objection is simple. A 60-foot intelligent, humanoid sea creature is biologically absurd. There's no way something that big and that strange could exist without us catching it, photographing it, sticking it in a museum, right? Well, let me push back on that, because the science is not nearly as settled as you'd think. Start with this fact. We have explored less than 5% of our own oceans. Let that number sink in. The deep ocean is the largest habitat on the entire planet, and we have laid eyes on almost none of it. We have sent more people to walk on the moon than we have sent to the deepest part of the sea. The bottom of the ocean is, for all practical purposes, an alien world that happens to be sitting on our own. And the things we do find down there are genuinely difficult to believe. The giant squid, an animal that can grow over 40 feet long, was considered a sailor's myth, the literal inspiration for the Kraken. For hundreds of years, scientists dismissed it. Educated people laughed at it. And then, in 2004, researchers finally photographed a living one, and in 2006 they captured one on film. A 40-foot monster that haunted legends for centuries turned out to be completely real, and we only confirmed it less than 20 years ago. The colossal squid is even bigger. There are whales, the beaked whales, that are so elusive that some species are known almost entirely from carcasses that wash ashore, animals the size of a school bus that we have essentially never observed alive. So when someone tells you that a large creature simply cannot exist in the deep sea without us knowing, they are telling you something that the history of marine biology flatly contradicts. We have a long, embarrassing track record of declaring things impossible right up until the moment they're hauled onto a deck. Now add the Antarctic factor. The water around Antarctica is uniquely capable of preserving large, strange life. The extreme cold slows aging and metabolism, which is part of why creatures down there grow to enormous sizes and live extraordinarily long lives. The darkness and the pressure keep humans out. And the ice shelves, as I mentioned earlier, create sealed, hidden bodies of water that have never been surveyed. If a population of large animals had adapted to that environment over thousands or even millions of years, evolving pale, light-starved skin and a body shaped by that crushing dark world, there is no scientific law that says it's impossible. There is only the fact that we haven't looked hard enough to prove it. And "we haven't looked" is a very different thing from "it isn't there." Here's where the story takes a turn that a lot of people aren't comfortable with, and I'll let you decide what to make of it, because there's a question that hangs over all of this. If there were something extraordinary in Antarctic waters, would we even be allowed to know? Antarctica is not governed like the rest of the world. It is controlled by an international agreement called the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, which sets the entire continent aside and places enormous restrictions on what can happen there and who can go. On the surface, the treaty is a beautiful thing, a rare example of nations agreeing to preserve a place for science and peace. But the practical effect is that access to Antarctica is tightly, almost obsessively controlled. You do not simply travel to the interior. Movement is restricted, research is coordinated through official channels, and vast regions are effectively off-limits to ordinary people. There is no continent on Earth where it is easier to keep something quiet, because there is no continent on Earth with fewer independent eyes. And the Ningen sightings come with a strange shadow attached. Witnesses have reported that the Japanese government and its research agencies were dismissive, even evasive, when the topic came up, despite the creature's name first circulating in connection with official research vessels. Photographs that supposedly existed were said to be poor quality, lost, or never released. Satellite images that appeared to show enormous pale shapes in the water near Antarctica, circulated online for a time, were debated furiously, and then quietly faded, with no official body ever willing to seriously investigate or explain them. The pattern, over and over, is the same. A sighting surfaces, it gains attention, and then the institutions that could actually confirm or deny it simply go quiet. Now, I want to be fair here, because there's an innocent explanation. Serious scientific organizations are not in the business of chasing sea monsters. Engaging with a cryptid story, even to debunk it, can make a respected agency look ridiculous, so the safe move is always to say nothing. That's a perfectly reasonable read, and I won't pretend otherwise. But you have to admit, whether it's deliberate secrecy or just institutional embarrassment, the result is identical. The one part of the world most capable of hiding a large, unknown creature is also the one part of the world where almost no one is allowed to go look, and the few who are allowed have every reason not to talk. Keep that in mind, because it's about to matter. Now, I've made a strong case so far, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't turn around and tear into it, because this story, like every story of this kind, has a serious problem, and that problem is people who lie. Let's be honest about the weak points. The famous Ningen satellite images that spread across the internet, the ones showing giant white shapes in the southern seas, are almost certainly not what people claimed. Image experts pointed out that they were most likely ice formations, cloud reflections, or compression artifacts, the digital smearing that happens when you zoom into a low-quality satellite photo. The human brain is a pattern-finding machine, and it is exquisitely, almost helplessly, tuned to see faces and bodies where there are none. It's a phenomenon called pareidolia, and it's the same reason you see a face on the moon or an animal in the clouds. Show a person a vague white blob in cold water and tell them it might be a humanoid, and a huge percentage of them will suddenly see arms, a head, and a face that simply are not there. Then there's the misidentification problem, and it's a strong one. The Southern Ocean is full of large, pale, strange-looking animals. A beluga whale is white. A dead, bloated whale floating belly up can take on grotesque, almost humanoid proportions. Decomposing basking sharks have fooled trained scientists into thinking they'd found sea serpents. A large jellyfish, a sunfish, a half-submerged sheet of ice, any of these, glimpsed for a few seconds in bad light by an exhausted sailor at the end of a long shift, could absolutely be mistaken for something monstrous, And we know for a fact that this happens because it has happened over and over throughout maritime history. And then there's the oldest problem of all: hoaxes. The history of cryptids and monsters is absolutely riddled with frauds. Men who carved fake bodies, glued bones together, faked photographs, and invented eyewitness accounts purely for attention or money. The internet age made it 1,000 times worse. Anyone with basic editing software can now produce a drone video of a sea monster convincing enough to fool millions, and they do, constantly, for views. So when I tell you a drone caught a giant humanoid beneath Antarctica, your instinct should be suspicion. Mine was too. Because for every real mystery, there are 100 fakes built to look exactly like one. That is the honest, uncomfortable truth. And any video that doesn't tell you that part is trying to sell you something. So, if all of that is true, if there are this many ways to be fooled, then why am I still standing here telling you this story? Why did I bother? Because there is one account that survives every single one of those objections, and that's the one I've been saving. So let's go back to where we started. The drone. Here is everything I've been able to piece together about what actually happened and why it's different from everything else in this story. This was not a sailor squinting into the dark. It was not a grainy satellite image open to interpretation. It was not a hoaxer with editing software. It was a scientific autonomous underwater vehicle, a piece of precision equipment doing a routine job. Its task was to map the underside of an ice shelf and survey the seafloor below, the kind of mission these machines run constantly. The drone carried high-resolution cameras and a full suite of sonar and depth instruments, because its entire purpose was to measure things accurately. It had no imagination. It could not get tired. It could not be tricked by bad light or want for attention. It simply recorded what was in front of it, exactly as it was. And according to the people involved, what it recorded, at a depth and in a location where nothing that large should exist, was a single, enormous, pale form resting against the seafloor. At first, the team reviewing the data assumed it was geological, a pale rock, a fold in the sediment, a chunk of fallen ice, until it moved. The footage, by the accounts of those who saw it, shows the shape lifting away from the bottom in one slow, deliberate motion, not the thrashing of a startled fish. Not the drifting of a dead carcass at the mercy of the current. A controlled, purposeful movement, the way you or I would rise from lying down. As it lifted, the form elongated, and the cameras caught what the sonar had already implied, a body far too organized to be random. A mass at the top, the size and position of a head, two long appendages extending from the upper body, moving independently the way arms move, and a lower body that tapered and pushed against the water, propelling the entire enormous shape forward with a single, smooth, unmistakably muscular stroke. But it's the last few frames that emptied the room, because as the creature moved, it turned. It turned toward the drone, toward the light, the way an animal turns to look at the thing that is watching it. And in that turn, for less than a second, the camera caught the front of the head, two dark recessed points where eyes would be, a horizontal line beneath them where a mouth would be. A flat, pale, broad face, larger than a human torso, oriented directly at the lens. It did not flee. It did not panic. It looked. And then, with one more stroke of that massive body, it moved out of the cone of light and was gone, back into water that no human eye had ever seen, and the drone could not follow. The sonar logged the size, 60 feet at the low estimate. The thermal readings, the people involved say, registered a body warmer than the freezing water around it, which is the detail that truly broke them, because a fish does not generate its own heat. Only an air-breathing animal, a mammal, something closer to us on the tree of life than to a cod, holds its warmth in cold water like that. The instruments, the cold, indifferent instruments that cannot lie and cannot dream, had recorded a 60-foot, warm-blooded, self-propelled, human-shaped creature looking into the camera at the bottom of the sea, beneath the Antarctic ice. This is why the description in those final frames matched the whalers. It matched the Japanese crews from 20 years before. It matched the satellite blobs people had argued about for a decade. It matched the mermaids of Norse legend and the sea gods of Babylon, and the thing Columbus complained about in his log. Every thread in this entire story, the ancient myths, the modern sightings, the science of the deep, the silence of the institutions, every single one of them was pointing at the exact same shape, and the drone finally caught it holding still long enough to be seen. The reason the researchers went pale, the reason that footage was quietly set aside, is that there was no longer any way to call it a whale, a wave, or a hoax. The machine had taken imagination, exhaustion, and deception out of the equation, and what was left standing in the frame was a face. So that's the story, and I'll be straight with you, the way I've tried to be this whole time. I cannot put that footage in your hands. The people who have it are not the kind of people who hand it to a stranger, and a continent governed by treaty and silence is very good at keeping its secrets. You are allowed to doubt this. You should doubt this. Doubt is the only honest way to walk into a story like this one. But here is what I cannot make myself ignore. Strip away the hoaxes. Strip away the blurry satellite images, and the tired sailor misidentifications, and the tricks of the polar light. Take all of it off the table. Every piece a skeptic could reasonably attack. And what you are left with is still a creature that experienced whalers described before the internet existed, that nearly every ancient culture on Earth carved into its myths, that the deep ocean is more than capable of hiding, in the one place on the planet built to keep a secret, finally caught on an instrument that has no reason to lie. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. We have explored 5% of our oceans. 5. And in that 5%, we found animals so strange they sound invented. The Ningen lives in the other 95, in the cold and the dark beneath the ice, in the last unexplored country on Earth. And if a single drone, on a single routine mission, can turn and find a face looking back at it from the bottom of the world, then I have to ask you the only question that really matters here. What else is down there, in the dark, that simply hasn't been caught yet? Because even after all of this, I can't shake the feeling that we've only just scratched the surface. If this story kept you watching, subscribe and hit the like button, because the next thing we found in that same water is somehow harder to explain than this. You don't want to miss it.